Welcome to TalentWise, a podcast dedicated to identifying and unpacking challenges and solutions related to the workforce. Each week, we'll hear from experts in their field or industry who are fighting to better understand shifting dynamics. What are those dynamics? Put most simply, the workforce crisis we've been talking about and seen coming for decades is now upon us, and most of us aren't nearly as prepared as we should be. In our country, we have a complicated problem to solve. Our gross domestic product is going to remain flat for the next several years, while at the same time, workforce participation, which is defined as the number of Americans who are not currently working or looking for work, is moving towards 60% after peaking around 2000. It's been declining since 2008. The kicker here, the reason this problem has remained somewhat abstract, is that 90% of boomers will exit the workforce in the next 5 years. Many in that generation stuck around because of the impact of the Great Recession on their retirement or their savings. Now they're leaving and they will not be coming back. Most industries today are starting to proactively address this problem, but many are not. Put most simply, those industries and the employers who compose them that actively pivot to address these challenges will prevail, while those that do not undoubtedly will suffer the consequences. On today's episode, we're going to unpack what the convenience store industry is doing to fight these workforce headwinds. I'd like to welcome Jeff Lenard to today's TalentWise podcast. Welcome, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
For those listening, Jeff is the Vice President of Media and Strategic Communications for the National Association of Convenience Stores. While the opinions he shares today are his own, he is on the front lines of his industry in this tug of war for talent and has been since long before workforce development was cool. So again, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, I've been to your office. I have seen and appreciated your collection of Simpsons paraphernalia. When did you fall in love with The Simpsons?
So I've been here at NACS 25 years, and in that time, you start acquiring some things, whether you like them or not. I have Curry energy drinks on my shelf that I have not tested, but The Simpsons, I love them from the first episode. It was a Christmas episode, and it didn't have a happy ending. Homer actually did ruin Christmas, but what really struck me that I liked about it was. It was not the typical story. And at the time, in hindsight, they wanted to create the anti-Cosby show where everything is happy and because life is rough. And so there was something about that I thought was really compelling. The other thing, and then you start your job at NACS, and what do you have as a central character? You have Apu, the convenience store clerk. And they had a lot of retail, or have a lot of retail in the store. There's a 33-cent stores. There's the Try and Save, which is, take off on the budget places. There's the Gulp and Blow, which is about the least attractive sounding fast food you could have. And I think the worst of all, the grocery store is called Grocery Store, which kind of tells you there's nothing special about it. And we're talking about talent. We're talking about people. Sure, Apu had his flaws. He kind of like upcharged and stuff like that. But he was probably the most decent person besides Marge of anybody in that universe. And, to be incorporated in that universe, so then you get all that stuff. And we could go on about The Simpsons, but that's the short version.
Well, thank you for that background. I almost wrote my senior thesis in college on The Simpsons, so it just resonated with me a lot. So how did you come into this role at NACS? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was at a meeting last week, and this guy presented himself as the accidental CEO. I will present myself as the accidental long title me. I don't know what everybody else's experience is like, but, in high school, I did well in math, did well on the math PSATs, did well in math class, and the guidance counselor, you meet with them once a year. What should I do? Well, I should do engineering because I'm good in math. Well, what do engineers do? I don't know. A lot of stuff with math. You should do that. So I went away, went to engineering school, got a 4-year degree, realized about halfway through, not really all that exciting. Went and got an MBA in marketing. That was a little bit more exciting. And got a job at an engineering association in New York City and worked there for a couple of years. And then somebody in the PR department said, "You write pretty well for an engineer. Do you want to learn how to do PR?" Okay, fine. So that led to, a couple of years later, I'm out at dinner. Somebody says, we're looking for somebody at the National Association of Convenience Stores. What do you think of that? So everything you could say is accidental and everything you could say is intentional. So, the big lesson, I guess, and I don't, everybody else has a different career path, but it's kind of like doing whatever you're doing, do it well, and somebody may be noticing, and you never know where those opportunities can happen. And it's just like they say about sports, except for Allen Iverson. He doesn't believe in practice, but practice is where you really find your opportunities in game day situations. So that's how I came here, and I can't say any of it was deliberate along the way. But in hindsight, if I had to draw a line, well, my job is to tell stories. I could probably draw a line in explaining it, but it certainly was not linear.
Well, convenience stores really are the fabric and the backbone of a community far more often than I think most people think about or understand. What are the things that you and your colleagues and your members and people within those companies seeing and hearing about the workforce today?
So set that up by just when I started, I knew a little bit about convenience stores. Of course, you go to them, particularly as a kid, and I started November 1999, and my boss said, "Okay, we're putting you on a Y2K task force." Okay, why? Because it's a big deal for our industry. Can you explain why? And she said, "Okay, if Y2K happens," and that was a computer bug where only they didn't anticipate that computer programs would go into the year 2000. So 1999, they weren't sure if it was going to flip over. The concern was convenience stores sell 80% of the gas in the country. So if Y2K happens, there's going to be a problem getting gas. People are going to be either frustrated or rioting. Then they're going to go inside the store. They're going to say, okay, we got to withdraw money. There's a crisis. We have 130 ATMs in the country. That doesn't work. So, there was a whole big lesson the first month that convenience stores really fit into the fabric of life. And on average, yes, some people don't go often or at all, but on average, they conduct about 160 million transactions a day. So roughly every other day, you're at a convenience store, possibly buy gas, possibly go inside the store. If you don't go in that frequently, somebody's making up for you by going in 3, 4 times a day. And it's what I've noticed most is the discussion about customer experience right now, because look at broadly at retail. Almost everything at brick and mortar retail, almost everything can be replaced by something that's not brick and mortar. Almost everything, you can order food, you can order anything, and somebody will bring it to you. If it's something else, there's all these online opportunities where you can order something. So it really comes down to the customer experience. Why should somebody take a right-hand turn? Why should somebody, go to your store and get something when somebody can bring it to them? And it comes, the customer experience is about people. And it's like, what is there in that store? What is that human connection? Because otherwise, everything will just be delivery. It'll be robots and all kinds of stuff. So we've talked about people in our industry, and there are people who have been in our industry for decades, and they said, 30 years ago, people, labor was the number one issue. It still is. It's considerably different, but it is still the number one issue because the businesses that are least successful are the ones that look at people as a cost. And the most successful are those that look at it as an investment that, our people are better than the competition's. That means we can do more to attract customers.
No, that's great. And, we have seen firsthand the role that convenience stores play in urban cores and rural communities all across the United States. What are you hearing from your members about the workforce challenge today, what they are facing when it comes to hiring and retaining team members, and what is your industry starting to do about it?
Well, the one thing, and I think all the CEOs will acknowledge this, the job has become more complicated. We ask more of people than we ever have. And whether that's our channel or other channels, you're responsible for so much now. It's not like think back and watch an old movie and somebody's at the register, they ring up a couple people and they talk the rest of the day, and it's fun, and then they go home. It's super sophisticated with technologies at a convenience store. You're monitoring everything with the pumps. You're monitoring lottery sales and this and that and all kinds of things, and you also have to have customer service. So looking at how do you simplify jobs, and I think one of the things a lot of people are talking about is AI, and what can AI do. But what it does is it replaces the things, it takes the things that a person doesn't need to do and gives it to a computer, and it gives the person the ability to have that customer interaction. So there's a lot of talk about how do you use AI properly, and I'm sure you'll have a whole episode with an expert talking about that down the road, and all the mistakes that you can make right now. Because I think what I was saying earlier, if you look at this as AI is going to reduce our costs, no, done right, it doesn't reduce costs. What it does is it just redeploys your people a little differently, and makes them, so there's different ways to incur loyalty, and of course loyalty cards, loyalty points, all those things related to technology. But the number one thing when you talk to other industries and why they keep customers, well, I'll give you two examples, so slightly different. Insurance, there's a really, really high percentage of people re-upping their insurance or things like that because it's so hard to cancel, and that's just purely the opposite of customer service. But the other thing that people are very, very loyal to is a hairdresser or a barber, because there's a conversation, there's a relationship. There's a whole Seinfeld episode about that where Jerry cheated on the barber. But it's really difficult to cheat on somebody business wise when they know you, they know your family, they know things about you, and there's a connection. So any way you can establish that at retail, that's still the focus, I think, when you talk about convenience stores or anybody at retail, where how do you hire the people that like being around people. And that, by the way, that's a huge challenge now, because we also see that there's more and more people that say, hey, i'm I'm into having a job, but can it be somebody where I don't interact with people? Because some of those things have changed. When you asked what's changed, that is a big shift, and there's also a big shift in what people expect or levels of loyalty. Not saying that they're bad now, they're just different now. And thinking back a couple of generations, you had one job, perhaps your entire life, or huge loyalty. The company's always right. Don't question anything. That's changed quite a bit, and the employee has much more say in how that job plays out, if it plays out, than ever before. So it's looking at what the employee wants and what the employee's needs are, and then use those to serve the customer. And that's really the key step that didn't exist a decade or two ago.
Well, I was listening to one of the most recent episodes on your podcast, Convenience Matters, and you were talking about AI. I'm sure in your industry and in many others, AI is just very disruptive, but probably in a positive way.
Uh, Interesting. Younger people are versed in it, and they probably have subscriptions to ChatGPT or whatever. And there was something a couple weeks ago. Somebody, we needed some short copy written, and somebody submitted copy, and it's like, wow, this person's a total marketer. I mean, this reads great. And then somebody else said that was totally AI written, and I said, I can tell it's like adjectives and adverbs. It tends to write way over the top. So it's how do you take traditional communications, which is what are you trying to say, and craft things that way, with the immense power of AI in tapping into something far, far bigger. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there in just like learning how to not overuse certain words that I might rely on, or how do you find different ways to say things. It's a great um, tool. And I also heard somebody describe it as like an intern. When you hire an intern doesn't solve your problems, and it doesn't necessarily give you less work. It gives you different work, because you have to train the intern. Otherwise, the intern's really not able to do what he or she does best. So, same thing with AI. You kind of got to spend some time with it, and there's been so many discussions of late about where AI can apply and when doesn't it apply, and what should you put in AI? Because once you put something in AI, it is disclosable to anybody. So you don't run payroll through there. Don't run something that you're not comfortable the world seeing, because literally the world can see it on some level if they know how to find it. But quick example in a store. This isn't a convenience store, and I know it sounds like country dropping. Um, we had a meeting in Tokyo last week. We have a convenience summit over there, so we went to a couple dozen grocery stores, convenience stores. I won't talk about the amazing food there, but it was kind of amazing. But this one grocery store is pretty cool. It just had there's a lot of English there on signs, so you could kind of figure out what's going on. But one talked about a AI concierge in this grocery store. It's a high-end grocery store, and it was basically how to pair sake with whatever you're eating that night. And it was just a screen. So was it really AI, or was it just a touch screen that it kind of engaged you, and you said, I'm looking for this. Takes you to the next screen, I'm looking for this. Takes you to the next screen, I'm looking for this. Here's your solution. And here's backup choice one, and here's backup choice number two. And oh, by the way, they're within like an arm's length of where you're standing now. So, would somebody in the store doing that maybe be able to also do that? Sure, but this did it in like 40 seconds. I mean, it was super quick. It also allowed somebody who may not want to talk to somebody to also be able to do it. So yes, it's a version of AI, but I don't think it's a version most people think of. So you're starting to see things like that creep in there, and um, there's a lot of uses there, and it's just looking at how the older generation may be resistant to it and may be able to set the guardrails, so the younger generation can teach the older generation all these cool tools and still stay within those guardrails.
I think it's healthy and helpful to understand AI and the benefits that it can create within the context of reality and sort of like fact. So I think that background is really, really helpful. So when you think about workforce for convenience stores, when you hear from your members about challenges they may be having attracting talent or retaining talent, creating career pathways, what are the things that keep you and your peers and your members, what keeps y'all up at night?
Really, how do you keep them happy? How do you keep them motivated? And turnover. Convenience stores employ about 2.4 million people. So probably about 1% of the workforce, I guess. Not quite sure of what the workforce number is. 330 million people in the country. Figure maybe 170 million working, something like that. But anyway, so a significant number of people. But so turnover is about 100%. And for a lot of people, you look at that and it's like, wow, you got to hire a new person every year. That's really daunting. I was also talking to somebody in Australia last week, and she said their turnover is deliberately 400%.
Wow.
And it's like, okay, tell me about this. And she said she lives in an area in Australia which is very remote, and there's 100 kilometers between stores. And there's not a whole lot of people in a community where they have stores. There's a lot of travelers that go through, but not the biggest population. And they found an interesting solution. They found that people who backpack through the area stick around like 3 months, And so they tapped into something where they're looking at backpackers to have a job for 3 months. They also know other backpackers. They can recommend things. So it's almost like they've created some sort of cool scene for the people who travel about there. And yes, you're replacing a person every 3 months, but it's effective. They also talked about they have something. Their term was gray nomads, and those are people who are retired driving around in RVs, and they may stop at a place for a month or two or three. And how can they have temporary jobs? And so, what are the things that these people will probably be pretty good workers because they have a 30, 40, 50-year work history of something,
Mhm.
and they like to talk to people. There's other opportunities like that. We've talked to people who said, bus drivers, for instance, school bus drivers. They work two shifts, and they may have a period in the middle of the day when a convenience store is full, busiest, that may need people to work the lunch hour, whether it's food prep or just managing the registers. So opportunities like that, retirees, huge opportunities, because one of the things, a lot of people, when they retire, they may be set financially, they may not be set emotionally,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Wow.
they need that human connection that used to be. It could be the person, like, you are the person that we listen to, that we depend upon, and then all of a sudden you're not. And so, how can somebody depend upon you in a community? So, you see interesting ideas like that. Retired teachers, somebody is using, said, I love my fourth grade teacher, and she's even better working my stores. So, the thing that keeps people up most at night is how do you constantly make sure people are showing up the next day, and they're showing up with your brand in mind. The line that's repeated over and over from a CEO is, "I'm not the face of the company. Whoever is in the store is the face of the company, and
Yep.
however you're treated in that store is how what determines whether you come back. It's not the CEO, and if the CEO sent out some fancy worded essay about how important people are, it's what you see. So I think that's the decline in trips overall. Trips meaning visits to stores, um, goes back to what I was saying earlier, because people can find other opportunities without having to leave their home.
Mhm.
So how can what you sell be tied to the people who sell it to make you stand out when there's so many other opportunities? We've heard about this retail apocalypse for years, and
Yeah.
in some industries, it is definitely here. Convenience store industry last year, the industry shrank by about 140 stores, went from 152,000 something to 152,000 something. So it declined 0.1%, but there's other industries that are just getting they're having a tough time differentiating themselves from how you could just order something online. So that's the big thing. What gets people to drive to you to have that experience? And then in other cases, how do you become that delivery? The 7-Elevens talked about the anytime, anywhere concept. So wherever they are, they may not be near your store, but how do you get it to them?
It's interesting you bring up 7-Eleven. In our work, a lot of our association clients, there is among their, or I should say, association members, there are those who have the ability to, for example, build your own CDL school
Hmm.
versus a trucking company that can't do that, has to rely on, established and more traditional pipelines to sort of source and secure talent. As you think about some of the creative ways that different convenience store chains have thought differently about attracting talent to come to them, even if it's for a short period of time, what advice do you have for industry leaders outside of convenience stores about how to deal with what I think of as a workforce
crisis. I mean, if you take a big step back, the population in the United States is slowing at I guess it's continuing to grow, but at a decreasing rate. And somewhere in the mid 2030s, we will see contraction if things continue on this sort of same path of the US population. Some industries are much worse affected than others. But what advice do you have for folks who are perhaps for the first time really starting to unpack what this this core of related issues that we might speak of as workforce broadly? What advice do you have for them?
So it's basically everything that worked yesterday can still work today, but everything that worked yesterday may not work today. And so set up the right strategy. What do you want to accomplish? What do you believe in? And then maybe start thinking differently about the labor pool and where do you fish? You mentioned CDLs, commercial driver's licenses. During the pandemic, those you may remember, we had a big shortage of commercial drivers for fuel. And that created a real problem when there was a pipeline problem with the Colonial Pipeline. And they were short about 50,000 drivers. And that problem still exists. It just hasn't been talked about in a while. So, how do you find different drivers? And I read something a while back. 20% of all truck drivers right now are Indian, Indian background, and a huge upswing in that. So I don't know how it started, but I also noticed that you go to truck stops and they may have a place that is a diner and they also may have an Indian restaurant right next to it. So they're catering to a trend that's already existing, but where are different pools that you can draw somebody from that you can have as great ambassadors to your brand. And so it struck me just the Indian drivers and how many there are now. Um, there are different groups that work with folks who are somewhere on the neurodivergent spectrum.
Mm.
And just a quick story, this one store that is in New England, they read Good to Great, the Jim Good to Great, just look it up. But they didn't know what they wanted to be great at. And then they decided they want to be great on employees. And one of the things is they found a local group that was getting people that couldn't get jobs because of neurodivergence. And the first one they hired, they said the first year there in Massachusetts, they had 3 straight blizzards on a Monday that each dumped 20 inches of snow. Each one, 3 straight Mondays. Now, not likely to happen in Alabama, but other areas it may. But one of the things they said in those 3 weeks, they had 12 stores and one of them was closed 1 hour. And
Wow.
I said, why? And he said, well, because Jimmy couldn't wait to get to work. And Jimmy was the first guy they hired. And Jimmy didn't complain about the snow. Jimmy didn't complain about the free coffee that everybody else complained about, that it doesn't taste any good. He just was so happy that somebody's given him a chance. And then you talk to when we visited, we went with some parents of these folks. You don't know what that does to a broader family. It's unbelievably powerful to see how people feel when their family member is given a chance, and then they're customers, and it changes a whole culture. So that's one opportunity. They also, that store and some others, hire people second chances, people who come out of the penal system where there's an opportunity. Nobody else wants to give them a chance. You give them a chance. For people who haven't felt that they have a belonging, if you can give them that sense, whether it's through training, whether it's through an opportunity, you might find some unbelievable power in how do you not just transform your workforce, but your culture. Now, I'm not saying doing this will do that. It's a lot more complicated than that. And what does your business look like, and what do you believe in? But just finding different ways to go to market, and who can do your job besides, you've probably heard this say, if the talent you want to acquire is you stick a help wanted sign on the door, and you see the old movies, and somebody just grabs that, pulls the sign off the wall, walks inside, says, "I'm your guy." You know, that's not how you find talent. If you have a help wanted sign and you hire somebody through that, you're probably going to get somebody that is looking around for help wanted signs, and not somebody that's going to be a long-term solution.
That's really meaningful. And your comments about trucking, we've done a lot of work in talent attraction in trucking specifically. And I think just like convenience stores to the average person may not be something in their minds that so much composes the fabric of a community or places and spaces where people go or gather. Um, in Alabama, for example, 70% of our communities are served exclusively by truck. And so if we don't solve for these kinds of problems, communities really will suffer. You won't have access to the goods and services that you need. I know one of the areas where your industry has really doubled down in a meaningful way, and many trucking companies and that industry has as well, is about human trafficking, eradicating this problem of human trafficking. I think our listeners would be really interested to hear about some of the things that you and your organization and your industry are doing to sort of combat that problem as well.
Yeah, and it also ties into labor. But you just mentioned just want to follow up on something you're just talking about with truckers. The other thing to think about with your brand is the delivery people. If you do have delivery operations, they're your brand as well. And you get to be a certain age like mine, and you're shaking your fist at somebody driving 30 miles down the road, loud music or whatever. But they're your brand also. And I think if it doesn't keep you awake at night, you might also want to think about those non-traditional employees who represent your brand, who are bringing food that has your name on it. And if they're driving down the street at a speed that you think is reckless, that tarnishes your brand, and you had nothing to do with that because it's third party. So that's something that, like I said, if it doesn't keep you up at night and you don't have enough things to keep you up at night, that should be one thing. But with human trafficking, yeah, there's trucking organizations that are involved, Truckers Against Trafficking. There's this group, Convenience Stores Against Trafficking, and they approached us a couple of years ago, maybe about 8 years ago. They said, we would like to work with convenience stores to see how we can play a role. And they defined it a certain way, and it's like, I don't know, because you're in marketing and you're in branding, and like the first reaction is, we want customers to be happy. And if you make them sad or you affiliate them too closely with something that's depressing, you may be doing good, but you may not be doing good. And so we talked about it a little bit. And it's like, how can we look at this? How do we come up with the best way to do this so that it's effective? And we settled on convenience stores are the eyes and ears of the community. And it's exactly what we had talked about earlier. Half of the US on average comes to a convenience store every day. So how can we serve as a watchdog to help if there's something that you see as a problem, have the ability to train employees so that you don't confront them, but you see some things and we point out some things that you might want to look for: matching tattoos, people that are deliberately apart from each other, people that are deliberately close to each other, etc. And how can you maybe interrupt that by involving law enforcement? The other point is the bathrooms. And convenience stores against trafficking, what they have is they have a freedom sticker, which they encourage people to put in bathrooms because that's oftentimes the only time who somebody as a victim is not watched. And there's a sticker there, and the sticker says two things. I mean, it has a number for the Polaris hotline, but what it tells people is there's people who care about you. So even if you're not willing to take action today, just setting up that, yes, you're in a bad situation, but when you're ready to address it, there are people here who are there for you. And if you're ready, then here's the phone number. It can be powerful. And right now, there's about 40,000 out of the 152,000 convenience stores have these stickers in bathrooms. And then we asked we surveyed. We do a lot of customer surveys, so we surveyed and we tested messages, just like anybody that has a PR firm or marketing firm. You want to see, what do people care about? And we tested a bunch of negative messages. We tested a bunch of positive messages. And the message that continually tested the highest with employees, potential employees, and with customers was convenience stores are actively involved in the fight against human trafficking. And that just told us there's something here. People want this. And framing it properly, not that, there's this terrible thing in our community, but there's a solution and you can be part of it. And we found, like, customers or employees, they won't necessarily go to the competition for 10 cents more an hour because they believe in what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be human trafficking. It could be whatever is your passion, whatever you care about, because the current generation, they care an awful lot more about social issues. So somebody has the opportunity to permanently, for the positive, affect somebody's life. It's a pretty powerful motivator. And in celebrating when that happens, it's really empowering. And as I said, whatever it is, people want more than a paycheck. They want to know that you stand for something. What is your purpose? What is your purpose in the community? How do you localize it? And that's the magic. If you can do that, you're probably going to have a decent shot at fighting the competition that is everywhere, both brick and mortar and online.
Well, from customer service to inventory to gas to lottery to trying to be aware of customers who may be in distress. Convenience stores ask a lot of the people who work for them. And I think the world is probably going to get increasingly complex rather than less complex. So thank you for all that you and your colleagues do. What was your first job? I assume it was not, your point of entry was probably not a convenience store.
No, it wasn't. And even though about somewhere around 17% do have that as a job, mine was as a camp counselor and later as a lifeguard. And for a while I was using in job interviews, they said, what's the job that taught you the most? And I would say swim instructor. And it's like, okay, we don't teach swim classes. What's the connection? And I said, okay, swim lessons were at 8:30 in the morning. These kids don't want to be there. They're freezing. Their parents are forcing them. And I got to convince them for an hour that they're not freezing and that they want to be there. So if I can convince an 8-year-old that doesn't want to be swimming that it was a good time, I can probably do okay in other forms of communication. So that was my pitch. So yeah, camp counselor, swim instructor, a little bit of tennis instructor, and that's just because they need a tennis instructor, and they say, "What sports do you play?" And it's like, "Oh, you're the tennis instructor." Well, I don't know anything about teaching tennis. Figure it out quick, son, because you're the tennis instructor.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your joining us today. We would love to have you back in the future to learn about what's happening in the world of convenience stores, to speak more about some of the outcomes of some of the initiatives that you all have going on at NACS. If you would, tell our listeners where they can learn more about the work that you do and the podcast that you run.
Okay, so thank you. So our website, we decided to make it convenient. So it's convenience.org. Be careful how you spell it. A lot of people can't spell it, but I won't do that. And then our podcast, Convenience Matters, conveniencematters.com. I'm Jeff Lenard, spelled unusually, Lenard. Google me, send me a note. I'm happy to talk with you. And Danny, thank you for all the stuff that you do. You guys do some great work out there, and just how do you make a difference and tell your story and the importance. Life is really about telling stories now, and you guys do a great job doing that.
Well, you're awfully kind. Thank you for your time today. For those of you listening at home, I hope you will tune in next time. We'll hear from Kim Lear, the founder of Inlay Insights. I met Kim years ago. Jeff, you would like Kim a lot. She was speaking at a conference And I asked her about a year or two later if she would come and speak with our team at our annual meeting. And our team was so blown away. I reached out to her to see if she would be willing to join us for an episode of Talent Wise, and she's excited to do so. So I hope all of you at home will tune in. In the meantime, Jeff, thank you. We appreciate you. Best of luck to you and your industry in tackling workforce-related challenges. And we will invite you back to hear more about what's going on in your world.
Thank you, Danny. Hope to talk to you on podcasts and outside of podcasts.
Looking forward to it, Jeff. Thank you so much, man.